Well, if there was any doubt about where the Matildas are at 12 months out from hosting the Asian Cup on home soil, they were given a rather rude awakening on Friday morning, Thursday afternoon local time in the USA in Houston, as they took on Japan and were, for lack of a better term, thoroughly embarrassed in a 4-0 defeat, only managing one shot on goal. It wasn't even on target. It was literally one shot
On the
in the
goal.
87th in the 87th minute. It was not good. Matildas were behind the eight ball from the get-go, Lockie, and honestly, yeah, I think embarrassing is the only way to describe that performance. This was everything that we feared it would be and much more.
Yeah, you say for lack of a better term, I think it's probably the exact right term is embarrassment. It was an incredibly poor performance from the Matildas. I think there were a few reasons why, which we'll delve into, but on the surface of things, this was supposed to be somewhat of a competitive outing, and the last one against Asian opposition that we'll get before the Asian Cup. And Japan are an absolute cut above where the Matildas are at the moment. And if we play anything like that, we'll barely make it out of the group at the Asian Cup, let alone compete for a trophy.
I mean, the only advantage of hosting the Asian Cup is it should mean a favourable group draw and an easy way out of the group. And we sort of saw that in 2022, where Australia absolutely dominated the group under Tony Gustafsson before running into South Korea in the quarterfinals and getting knocked out. But yeah, I mean, depending on who you draw, like all it takes is one powerhouse to slip in the rankings, and suddenly you're looking at second in the group, and then who are you facing in the quarterfinals could very easily determine whether or not it's an easy path in the knockout stages. But focusing on this game in particular, so Japan 4, Australia 0 to start the She Believes Cup in the USA. First half, Australia conceded 2 goals. Alana Kennedy and Mackenzie Arnold, who are both in NWSL preseason, get caught out for the first one. But it really was a failure of the entire team in defending that it was allowed to get anywhere near those two. Just absolute catastrophic, just no communication, nothing like that. And then the second one, Claire Hunt gets the signals mixed up with Alana Kennedy on a cross, and Mina Tanaka, who scored her second goal, just it was honestly, I'm lost for words trying to describe it. And I know I've got my notes here in the rundown, but I'm lost for words trying to describe these, because these were so uncharacteristic of the Matildas' defenses, and I just maybe you can explain it a little bit better than I can, because like I said, I think it was just a catastrophic defensive performance all around.
So I think definitely there is some individuals that we have to talk about. Claire Hunt has been a very consistent player for the Matildas over a fairly decent chunk of time now. That was a very uncharacteristic error from her. I don't think Alana Kennedy can be blamed on that second one at all. Claire Hunt comes in, leaves her position in the left centre back role and comes and gets the flight of the ball wrong, and the players in behind. I also do think Mackenzie Arnold, we have to have a chat about her. I think, yes, she is in her NWSL preseason, but she's also slipped away from the number one spot towards the end of last season as well. I think it was the last 7 games in all competitions at the end of last season she didn't play. So she's gone back to the US from West Ham, and she's not even the number one goalkeeper, at least at present, where we have someone in Tegan Micah who is starting in the WSL for Liverpool every week and doing a lot of good things. And I think potentially that kind of Minister for Defence reputation is allowing her to be picked with regularity. We've seen, I think Micah got one of the friendlies a few months ago, right? But I think there needs to be a conversation about who starts in goals as well. Players further up the field. I thought Hayley Razzo was incredibly soft early on, giving the ball away in a lot of occasions. And I think a lot of those individual performances were poor, and it also stems back, I think, to the coaching role as well. I think this game reads as a massive indictment on how long that process is taken. And, the panel were talking about at halftime. It's hard to be motivated for a game like this when things are just going to reset themselves in a couple of months anyway. So where is the passion and drive to improve and develop going to come from if you know it's going to be all set back to zero in a few months' time? So I think that plays a part as well.
Yeah, for me, I absolutely agree with everything you've just said, but I think just looking at the way Japan were pressing both on and off the ball was, I thought it was incredibly impressive, and how much of that comes down to the fact that the Matildas lost at sea is up for debate. But I mean, they barely had any possession in the attacking half in the first half, and when they did, they got nowhere near the attacking third. Um, to go to the second half, no subs from Tom Samani to start the second half. They conceded just 7 minutes in, and it was still another 10 minutes after that before, the first changes were made by Samani. But for me, I think the first 2 minutes of that second half summed up the entire game. So Australia kicked off to start the second half. They got the ball into Japan's half, but the press was just so instantaneous and so effective that they were basically forced back beyond the halfway line within 45 seconds. But there was no worry from Japan in doing it. It was just well oiled. It was literally, it's okay, you go here, you go there. They all knew what they had to do, and they did it without breaking a sweat. And it was no surprise there that the ball got turned over literally 2 minutes later. And, 5 minutes after that, they concede a goal. It's something that Australia hasn't always had the best history with, is dealing with presses like that. And like I said, there's the AFC rivals here in Japan who, as we've pointed out already, are likely to be a path through to the Asian Cup at some point. Like, Australia will have to face Japan at some point throughout that tournament. And this game filled me with absolutely no confidence that Australia can handle it. And I made this point in our group chat that this is why, if you're Japan, you bring in a coach like Niels Nielsen. This was their first performance under Nielsen, first squad, and if there were any sort of little holes in Japan's game, either from a mentality perspective or just an on-field perspective, those were nearly completely wiped out in just a couple of training sessions. Like, this is someone who's come from outside Japan, he is a Danish coach, and has fixed nearly everything. And again, it might be a little bit too early to say with any sort of definitiveness because Australia was so poor in this game, but recruitment already looks like it's paying off for Japan.
Yeah, look, the Matildas made them look good. There's no doubt about that. And you're right, their press was exceptional, but it was also naive from Tom Samani, I think. That's another aspect that we have to consider here, is that the Matildas weren't set up for success in this game. You come into a game against, as you say, a new coach. You don't know exactly what to expect, fair enough. But in the first 20 minutes, it was clear to see that the Matildas had no idea how to move past even the first pressing line, right? So Japan would set up essentially with a front four and then a solo midfielder in behind as well. And they'd let a couple of passes play out from the back. And then as soon as they got it into an area they liked, usually a pass to like Alana Kennedy a little bit out wide, they'd just be player for player, pressing hard individually, and then there'd be one more pass, and then we'd kick it out of bounds on the sideline, right? It happened over and over and over to absolutely no adaptation from the coaching staff. And I think that's a big issue as well. And I think it's no surprise that in the second half, the couple of occasions where we managed to break through the lines, a lot of it was to do with Ellie Carpenter, and she is wasted out in wide areas for me on the ball. We had a little bit of a phase under Tony Gustafsson where she was inverting and playing almost that additional 10 role, just the way, not even being that high up the field, but moving from fullback to the 10, she was breaking the lines and cutting through. I think that was incredibly valuable, that was underutilized. But we just kept staying with this four at the back, and Japan kept going player to player, and we had absolutely zero answers for it. And we failed to adapt, and that was a large reason why we couldn't, even in the second half after we'd settled into it a little bit, get any real hold in the game.
Yeah, I definitely think that whoever the new coach is really needs to assess how to best use Ellie Carpenter. I mean, look, Samani is going to do what Samani is going to do. We know he's here in an interim capacity, and hopefully that's solved by the April window. because otherwise it's like 3, maybe 4 windows at most before the Asian Cup, and honestly, time really is running out to fix something. Like it's not like to use Niels Nilsson as an example here. Japan were already such a quality side, and they've done quite well at major tournaments. In the past couple of years, they went on a deep run at the World Cup. They made the quarterfinals of the Olympics. So it's not like he's come in and taken over a side that's just completely lost of direction and turned them around instantaneously. This was already a good side, and it's sort of like, to use the analogy, when rather than go out and get a new door when the door starts to squeak, you just put some oil on it, right? That's sort of what Nielsen has done, is he's put the oil to fix the squeak, and suddenly the door's working like new again. So, this is, I don't want to say it's a rebuild for the Matildas, but the new coach is probably going to come in. He might want to move on some of the old guard, might want to bring in some new players, and how that all gels together in less than 3 windows, which is what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most. Before an Asian Cup is potentially concerning, particularly given that depending on where players are moving in and around the world at that time, are we going into an Asian Cup where, Alana Kennedy and Mackenzie Arnold are back in pre-season with the NWSL? Is Courtney Vine in pre-season? Caitlin Torpey in pre-season? These are all questions that need to be asked, depending on who's part of that Asian Cup squad is. Where are they at? Is it going to be an A-League women heavy squad, an England heavy squad, because they're the ones who are playing game time? Like, it's a very concerning question to ask. But I mean, 87th minute before Australia even managed to get a shot, 41% possession total, 18 shots with 8 on target for Japan. From an Australian perspective, besides Ellie Carpenter, who we've already talked about, is there any positive at all that can be taken from this game,
Lockie? No. No, I don't think so. Let me try and make a long-term positive point, which doesn't really have anything to do with this game, is that there is something to be said for timing your run, right? And I'm a big believer that in international football, obviously tactics and the way you set up your team is very important, as we've said, but particularly when it comes to major tournaments, the status of the mindset of a team and the chemistry and the belief and all those mental factors, for me, are significantly more important than a club side, and it's only escalated when you play on home soil, right? And we understand that Football Australia are probably holding off on appointing a coach because someone is under contract, and maybe at the end of the European season we'll see that come in. But if it is a scenario of only 3 to 4 windows, well, if you're going to ride your peaks and troughs, this is the low point for the Matildas here. And if you can keep climbing up, and you got one window, okay, a couple of better performances and results. Next window, new coach, a little bit new setup, players are going well, they're starting to gel, optimism is starting to be there. Then you don't actually allow yourself too much time to fall down again before you get to the Asian Cup. So if I'm going to try and take one positive, it's that hopefully when the new coach comes in, there's just enough time to ride the wave up and not enough time to go back down again. So that's what I'm hoping for, and the momentum can carry them through. But obviously you need time in the training park as well, and that's going to be the real challenge.
So what you're saying is that we need to get Jeff Hopkins to start coaching the Matildas, is what you're saying, because he's an expert at timing runs.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to time your sprint, you got to finish the leg strong.
One last thing I wanted to touch on here. Leah Blaney, who spent nearly her entire tenure in the Australian national team setup, either as an assistant coach for the senior side or head coach of the under-20s. She's constantly showcasing the importance of the need to catch up to Japan, very much identifying Japan as the benchmark. And on this week's episode of the Dubcast, I talked about that, in detail with our guest Alex Bishop. But she's now the assistant coach of Japan. This was her first game in the role, and I'm not saying correlation equals causation here, but you can't ask for a better start than that, right?
No, and even if it is just her first game, and I don't know how much impact she's had, but on the basis of the result, she's made a very good decision. I know she made a comment in an interview recently saying, "Can't wait until we play Australia in an Asian Cup final." Well, Leah, I'm not sure if we're going to get there at this rate. So
2030 maybe?
2030, maybe. It might take a bit of time to reset the team. But look, she's clearly highly sought of in the women's football space and in the Asian football space. And she's been recruited by a very quality football team. And I wish her all the success.
I echo those sentiments as well. That will do for this little mini episode of the Dubcast, part of the Roundball Australia podcast network. This was a YouTube exclusive video, so you won't find it in the podcast feed. We'll be back on Monday for another one of these YouTube exclusives as we recap the Matildas game against the USA and hopefully a better performance to talk about, Lockie.
Hopefully, just give me some fight. Honestly, that was, as you say, it was embarrassing to, especially the new kit and all the story behind it. I don't know if you want to talk about it too much. I'm not a huge fan of the colours, but the sentiment behind it and the story is really nice. And to debut it in a match like that was really disappointing. So yeah, put some pride back in the shirt and let's have a better performance next week.
Yeah, no, we'll get into kit chat on the next full episode of the Dubcast, dropping every Wednesday on YouTube and on podcasting platforms. But that will do for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Goodbye.